Right. Thanks for being patient, guys. Sorry about that. So welcome. Thank you for coming at 5 o'clock on the last day of a conference. Are you ready for some design? I certainly am. I haven't seen much thus far. My name is Sugg. I'm a product designer at Coinbase. I work primarily on Coinbase Pro. And today what I'd love to talk about is product process. I think I've learned time and time again that good process always leads to good products. And I think especially for Ethereum, where we're at as we continue to drive towards traction and mass adoption, recognizing the necessity of good product design process, I think is essential. So we're going to talk a little bit about some process methodologies as well as user research specifically within those processes. But first, I would love to tell you guys a story, if that's okay. Are we good with some storytelling at the end of what was probably a pretty technical conference? Yeah, there we go. All right, so Cassandra. You may have heard her name before. She is a woman from Greek mythology. She was a princess of Troy, and she caught the eye of a very powerful god, Apollo. And so Apollo fell madly in love with Cassandra. So when she asked Apollo for the gift of prophecy, or being able to see truly into the future, he agreed, on the condition that she would love him in return, that she would be with him if he gave her this gift. And so she agreed, and she got the gift of prophecy. Shortly thereafter, she rejected him and went back on what she had said. And as many of us could probably understand, in the face of unrequited love, Apollo was pretty pissed. And so, while he couldn't take back the gift of prophecy that he had given her, he could curse her on top of that. So he gave her prophecy, but he cursed her that she would never be believed. And so you can imagine this woman who is rightly seeing into the future, seeing sort of the end or the demise of people, but never being believed, would probably be driven somewhat mad. Here are a couple examples of some prophecies that Cassandra put out there that were absolutely true, but were not heeded by those around her. The fall of Troy, the death of Agamemnon, another figure from Greek mythology. And these are just two of a laundry list of correct prophecies that Cassandra gave and was not listened to. Okay, so why are we talking about Cassandra? I'm glad you all are, still sitting here. I think that for UX designers, there are times when you are advocating for real user needs, maybe in the context of research, new insights, and you are met with feelings that feel a little bit like Cassandra. And it usually comes into place when you're trying to share those insights, share those findings with other team members. So for example, if you're talking to members of the business side of your company, and you're trying to share things that challenge very closely held assumptions, or at least perceptions of our users. And so what I want to do first is kind of ground us in the process. I experienced this feeling of Cassandra, if you will, really recently. I work at Coinbase, as I said, and we decided sort of freshly that we were going to insert more user research into our design process. And so I took that on as a one-woman research show, and I conducted a bunch of research. I did 12 user interviews. I recruited everybody. I dug through a bunch of old studies we had done. And I came up with this fabulous presentation, and I walk into the stakeholder meeting like super jazzed. We found so much interesting stuff, incredible insights that could just completely connect a number of dots within our pro interface. And I go in and I start to talk about that research, and maybe some of you are designers or researchers and are familiar with the eyes glazing over, the phones coming out, the zombie nods of kind of paying attention but not really paying attention. And I could just tell that that research was not resonating. It wasn't permeating those held assumptions. It wasn't quite doing what it had done to me, which was much like what I think it would have been for Cassandra to be seeing these prophecies. To have this moment of enlightenment where you're talking to these users and you're suddenly realizing I wasn't looking at that the right way. I was looking at it from my perspective, and now I understand. But I could tell that as I was giving these research findings, it wasn't doing the same thing for them. So let's go to this for a second, because I do want to just explain overall the process that I was working from. And this is nothing new. If you're a designer in the room, I'm sure you've seen this before. This is called the Double Diamond Design Methodology. It was developed by the British Design Council. And the idea here with this methodology is that good ideas come from first exploring a lot of ideas. That to get to something interesting and new and innovative, you first have to explore a lot. So you can see here in the diamond, it's diverging and then converging, diverging and then converging. And the two sides here are labeled design the right things and design things right. So the first half of this diamond is more about arriving at a problem. So first, let's explore all of the problems our users have ever had. So the research that I was conducting was very much in this vein. So what can we discover about what they are having trouble with? And then the work to get across this diamond is to align on that, to agree that this is the main problem that we want to solve. And then the divergent work of designing things right is then applying design to those problems. So what are the possible solutions to this? What are a million possible design solutions to the problem that we have prioritized together? And then what are we going to deliver? What is the best of those solutions that we have explored that we're going to go after and put out? And so we're going to focus on this first diamond for the rest of the talk. As I said, in my personal journey of feeling like Cassandra, we were in this discovery phase. Oh, that is really loud, okay. We were in this discovery phase of the first diamond. And this wasn't just user interviews, this was a ton of background research. So we consulted past studies, there was quantitative research that we were looking at, there was market research that we were doing for our competitors. We used quantitative metrics to find our user segmentation, to then recruit these users. And then I conducted in my apartment 12 interviews over the computer. And what I realized was, as I've already told you, the big problem was crossing this point where I was the owner of all of this sort of new insight, this new information, and how do I get to the other side where the rest of my team can come into that? So cross-functional team members, not just designers, PMs, engineers, and then sort of business-related stakeholders. How can I invite them into that research? How can I invite them into this sort of transformational prophecy that is having firsthand touch with our users? So how to invite cross-functional team members into user discoveries, and the kicker here is that they probably challenge existing perceptions, and that's just the way it goes for the people involved. So, interestingly, Cassandra kind of maps pretty well back onto this. We're going to put aside for a second, her thing is kind of magical. You're never going to believe her because she's cursed. But there are a number of things that, if the curse piece wasn't there, would still kind of get in her way as far as being heard and communicating these prophecies. So first of all, Cassandra was an outsider to the community. She had no business giving these kinds of prophecies. She was not a government leader. She was not a religious leader. She was a princess saying that Troy was going to fall. Next, she suggested really drastic change. And I don't know about you, but I would rather not believe if some crazy person came up to me and said that the world was going to end. It's just too drastic. It's not approachable. And then last, she spoke in riddles. So even if you could get past the credibility piece, the approachability piece of what she's saying, you couldn't understand what it was she was saying. So when it comes to crossing this diamond, I think that all of these things apply. I think that it's a matter of establishing credibility. It's a matter of communicating with approachability, and then clear communication in general. So we're going to dig into each of these pieces to overcome our curse. All right, so for the credibility piece, what was really interesting about the work that I was doing, we actually are fortunate at Coinbase to have a dedicated research team, and I'm sure for most of you that may not be the case. But what was really cool about this was that because I was a designer conducting this research on a team of 4 designers, I had the credibility of the designers. So when I would pass a copy of this video over to the designers of these interviews, they're all excited about it. I have the credibility with them to keep it going up the chain. And then when all of the designers got really hyped about it, then they passed it over to PM. When PMs got really hyped about it, they passed it over to engineering, and it was just this ongoing chain. And then the next piece, I think, again, if you're a designer, you probably know this, or a researcher, people don't really like qualitative data. It doesn't, make them feel comfortable, I guess. And so I've learned time and time again as I am communicating user research that it's important to always pair it with quantitative data. Our business people, they only want to hear about statistics and data and click rates and daily active users. But I want to tell them about this weirdo crypto guy that I've been talking to for the past hour who just showed me everything he loves about Coinbase Pro and how we can change it. And it's important that they hear those things. Qualitative research is incredibly important. But again, keeping in mind your audience and being able to communicate those things in light of quantitative data to give it that credibility to be heard. So that's the credibility piece. Next, let's talk about approachability. So again, this harkens back to Cassandra. You can imagine her in the street yelling that Troy is, going down, and it just being totally insane and so far out there. I have felt the same way at times, this alarmist, like you talk to a user and it's like, oh, what are we even doing? We need to pivot the entire product. We need to restart today. Like, let's throw away all of our designs. But obviously that doesn't work, and that's not approachable in any way for someone who is aligned with the business. So again, to learn to mindfully communicate research findings that align with company strategy and goals. I think this is one that has always been a challenge for me, but again and again I learned that it's how you can be heard when you're sharing these things. Another tool that we have used very closely is persona creation, which is something else that, at times people have not been super excited about. They seem fluffy, they seem, again, qualitative, they seem inaccurate to some, but what they've worked for us to do is that they've made the research approachable. It's put it in a way where we can all get on the same page and understand what this research means. It's not that it's competing with our data, really it's just illustrating our data. It's giving it some lines and some color, and it's giving us specificity and nuance when it comes to the app interface. And so what we did with the designers now on board, they were all hype after the interviews, we all kind of secretly started pushing them into these different meetings of cross-functional team members, and we started to just slowly socialize all of this research. And it's a continual push of putting the research in front of people, having the conversations of fighting about the name of the persona or the picture that we're using to represent the persona, and getting everyone on the same page to alignment. And so the last piece, which probably encapsulates all of this as well, is clear communication. And this is probably the hardest piece, and maybe it should actually say patient communication, because I think that's the bigger work of the UX designer. But what we ended up doing was conducting a number of workshops. This was actually 2 weeks ago. We did 6 workshops throughout the week where we brought all of the research, we brought the personas, we brought everyone who was involved, every stakeholder, into a room, and we argued for hours. And it was great. It was the best thing, it was honestly the best thing we have done in a month. And has anyone done the deep work workshop that's happening outside? Has anybody seen it, the booth? Okay, there's an awesome, thank you. There's an awesome booth outside, and they are kind of illustrating this design process this week. And so if you take a look at their stuff, they're pretty much going through this iterative process of back to those diamonds, like design exploration, and then coming to a problem, and then exploring the problem, and then choosing a solution. And so that's what we did in these workshops. If anyone's interested in sort of the actual methodology of the workshops, I have it very well documented, and I'm happy to give it to anyone who wants to hear about it. But the main second piece here is just be patient. I think if anything, I've learned that it is worth giving everyone the time and space to actually explore the research, to give them an environment that almost mimics being part of the research. That might look like taking videos of user interviews and throwing them into random Slack channels with people who wouldn't usually see them, or inviting someone to do a user interview with you. But it's really a matter of letting them understand for themselves instead of sort of arguing from the high horse of UX and the high horse of business leader or whatever it is. It's worth letting them go through the journey. And so, in real life and together right now, we've crossed the diamond. We've gone from discovery and finally made it to definition. And so I leave with you, the impartation to use your credibility to champion user research. Whether you're a designer in the room, you're someone doing business, you are a researcher, you're a developer, whoever you are, use what you've got to get user research into your product. It will make it better, period. To empathize with the needs and goals of the company and make your insights approachable. If you're suggesting crazy stuff, nobody's gonna do it. And last, be patient in doing the work of communicating. Honestly, I think this is more work than even doing the research. The work of communicating it was much harder than that, but it ended up being totally worth it in the end. And I did also include, for anybody who wants this really great podcast that inspired this talk. And it's also about Cassandra's Curse, but it's about the climate crisis and the way that, similarly, those who are fighting for our climate feel kind of cursed to not be heard in some areas of the world. But with that, that's it. Thank you, guys. Questions? Oh, time. Oh, here, I'll give you my email address.
Thank you.
Thank you, no, it's okay. Oh, that's okay.
We're a bit shredded. Thank you a lot. Attends, c'est bon, normalement on est bon, on a envoyé à l'avance. It's ecosystem of Web3. Yeah.